I mean, 99% of all architecture around the world is kind of what I call design by Excel spreadsheet. So you get some sort of brief with the numbers, with the plot ratio, the cost, the floor area, the height limits, and so on, or how many apartments. And then you turn that into architecture. And architecture in the sort of widest sense. You turn it into real estate. And we sort of wanted to say that architecture should really be about architecture. It should be about culture, should be about science, should be about well-being, should be about people. And the laboratory is kind of the environment where you research these topics and try to find solutions for the challenges of our times, for sustainability, for social changes, for cultural desires, and new materials, new construction methods, new typologies, new ways to do architecture, procure architecture, and execute architecture.
Hello and welcome to another podcast of the Creative Insider. In this episode, I had the pleasure to talk with one of the co-founders of Lava Architects, a German office with one of the most avant-garde design philosophies in the country, Chris Bosse. Chris Bosse is the partner at Lava responsible for Asia and South Pacific. He's based in Sydney, Australia. So if you hear my voice being very weird during this podcast, it's because we recorded as soon as I got out of bed. If you've been following the podcast, you know that I've read the book How to Get Work, and I want to follow those steps to start my own architecture office. So if you want to follow me through the journey, subscribe to the channel, and eventually join the Patreon page where you can support us with $5 a month and be part of the Real Insiders. There you'll get access to our guests and you'll get early access to each podcast. I'm doing a series of interviews with many founders of offices so that they can share their secrets about getting the first client, setting up a design philosophy, and teach us how to win that first project. Thank you very much and enjoy the conversation with Chris Bosse. Hello, Chris. Welcome to the Creative Insider podcast.
Hi there. It's a great privilege to be here.
Thank you very much. We did this very quickly, very, very improvised because I'm in Germany, you're in Australia. So for me, it's the beginning of the day. For you, it's afternoon, right?
Yeah. Well, it's great to know that you're in my home country and I'm in Sydney, Australia, in the middle of winter. And it's sort of afternoon, something like 3 or 4 o'clock. And it's always great to hear back from good old Germany.
Well, maybe the German summer this year is like the Sydney winter. I don't know, because it's very rainy and weird weather.
Yeah, it could be. In Australia, people always think there's no winter because it's like, Australia can't be that cold. But it sort of drops to like 6 or 8 degrees at night. And during the day, as soon as the sun is out, it warms up to like 20. And then it drops again. So it's actually quite nice. So at night, you can sleep really well because it's nice and cool. And then during the day, you can still have outdoor activities, play golf or go swim or cycle or whatever people do.
I'm really excited to be talking to you because you're a co-founder of Lava Architects, which is a German office. As you said, it's from your home country. And I've been now living and working in Germany for up to 8 years, I think. And I have to say that the environment and the scene, it's not always so avant-garde. So your office, in my opinion, it's one of the most looking forward offices in Germany, and also one of the most probably looking forward in the world. So I'm curious to hear the story since the beginning about your office. At what point in your time came the idea to start the office, and how did you meet your other partners? How did Lava begin, more or less?
Yeah, so it's obviously kind of a long story, and we need to see where we start all this. But to your comment about German architecture, it's interesting when you grow up in a certain place, then that's all you know. So you sort of think that's normal. And for example, when I studied architecture in Cologne is a city that was heavily damaged during the war. and was rebuilt with sort of really cheap construction materials and really simple kind of low ceiling box building with tiled kind of ceramic cladding. And then you just sort of think that's normal till you discover other places that haven't experienced that and have completely different typologies and architectural kind of languages. Then I studied in Berlin, which is a very exciting city and very historic city. But in Berlin, you also had this topic of half of Berlin or more was destroyed. They actually say that more of Berlin was destroyed after the war than during the war. So the urbanists, after the war, they took the opportunity to kind of clear out all the old buildings and replace them with this, what we called at the time modernist. But in hindsight, like modernism is great, but there's also very simplistic stuff that came out of that. And then after the reunification in 89 and 91, they started sort of rebuilding Berlin. And this rebuilding of Berlin was based on this idea of recreating the historical Berlin, which the then political kind of force, there was the Senatsbaudirektor at the time in charge of rebuilding Berlin. And he kind of set a number of rules, the Planwerk Innenstadt, which is sort of the master plan for Berlin. And he said, for example, the building height, the materials for the facade, and the ratio of closed facade versus open facade. So all of a sudden, as an architect, all you could do was allocating square windows on a square building that is, I think, 25 meters high with a setback level on a stone facade. And you could maybe choose the type of stone, but that was pretty much all you could do. And then you could maybe treat the ground floor either with colonnades or some other sort of historicist treatment. And that was the architecture that I grew up with in the 90s when I studied in Berlin and worked in my first offices. And again, you'd sort of think that's normal. And in 2002, I moved to Australia. And all of a sudden, I found like a different world in Australia, which is their normal. And I found at the time that Sydney was sort of, to me, it looked like 1920s Chicago a little bit. You know, downtown, these high-rise towers that go all the way to the ground. There's nothing happening on the ground level in the CBD, and on the weekend, there's sort of deserted streets because all the bankers and insurance brokers go home to their house in the suburbs, and the city is sort of empty. And since then, Sydney has also transformed a lot, and there's a lot more people that moved into the city. There's more residential and much more mixed use. And now it's sort of transforming again because post-COVID, people don't go to the city to work anymore. And all of a sudden, all these high-rise towers have like a questionable future. That wasn't really a question, but it's so for me, moving out of Germany was an interesting step towards something new. And I worked for a large company here in Sydney on the Aquatic Center in Beijing for the Olympics in 2008. And that was an amazing opportunity. And it was really, for me, the time to apply my talents and creativity and things that I had learned on an international scale. And at the same time, Tobias Walliser was living in Amsterdam working for Ben van Berkel for UN Studio. And he won the competition for the Mercedes-Benz Museum in Stuttgart, which was to be opened for the 2006 soccer championship. And in 2004, we all met at the Venice Biennale in Italy, in Venice. And we were all exhibiting our work. The Aquatic Center in Beijing won a major award called the Atmosphere Award. And Tobias had a big kind of prototype of the Mercedes-Benz Museum there. And Alexander Rieck, the third partner, who was working with the Fraunhofer Research Institute at the time, he also had an exhibition there. And then we kind of sat at the coffee shop at the Biennale. And we were really sort of happy with what we had achieved and proud of our work. But we were also very aware that at the end of the day, it's, you know, we are working in these offices, but they're not our offices. They're not our projects. we employed and work for other people. And at that time, that idea was born. And now I get to your question. The idea was born to kind of think about what comes after these projects. So what comes after the Mercedes Museum, what comes after the Water Cube, and maybe there's a way to set something up ourselves. In 2007, Mercedes-Benz was finished. The Water Cube was also finished 1 year ahead of schedule. And we were approached by a German sort of entrepreneur who had business dealings in Dubai. And he had a very large project that he had kind of come up with a team, was a very visionary sort of sports project in the desert. And he approached us separately from another, but we all knew each other. And somehow, all of a sudden, everything fell into place. All these connections made sense. We were all on a plane to Dubai. And within a few days, we met at a meeting room in a hotel in Dubai and started this project together. So all of a sudden, we had a project. And that's the most important thing, I think, when you start a business, that you need to start with something. I mean, it's good to start with a vision and with a manifesto and with all of that, but if you start with a project, then you have something to apply your skills. And that's how it happened. So we had a large project that allowed us to set up 3 offices, to employ staff, to buy computers, buy software, and really think about what do we want to do in architecture and what do we want to do differently. How do we want to treat our employees, and what lessons have we learned from the commercial world, from the commercial practices we worked with, and how do we want to kind of develop as Lava?
How old were you when this happened?
So I was 2007. I would have been 36, and Tobias maybe. He's a little bit older, 38, and Alexander maybe 39.
So this is like the breaking moment was this first client, so to say, that you guys somehow connected to, and that was the start, the impulse for also, like, because you need resources, as you said, when you start an office. It's not like just suddenly you say, okay, we're going to start an office, but you don't have a client.
Yeah, that was the catalyst, at least. I mean, there's a few different models of starting offices, right? A lot of people go into academia, so they get a teaching job, and that gives them access to students and to ideas, and gives them a little bit of an income, and then they do competitions in their spare time. And the classic would be to win a competition, and then on the back of the competition, start a business. And I think traditionally that worked, and maybe it still works, but how many competitions do you have to do to actually win one? And how many competitions do you have to win to actually then get a project that goes ahead and that you get paid for? So it's a very big investment and of time more than anything. And I think we were sort of at a point of our career, maybe a little bit already advanced in age, which also has to do with the German education system. So we have 13 years of school. We start school at 6, plus 13, you're 19. And then at the time we had military service or civil service for 2 years. So then you're 21, and then you do an internship. And I worked on a construction site for 6 months, and the Mercedes-Benz factory, and in a couple of architecture firms. So all of a sudden you're 23 by the time you start studying. And then you study for 6 years. I studied in 4 different universities in Germany and in Switzerland. And by the time I was finished, I was 29. When in England or in Australia, people start school early, do 12 years, and then study a bachelor for 3 years, and then they're out at 21. I have people coming in with their CVs, they're 21 years old. They haven't traveled through the world, they haven't seen much, they haven't worked anywhere, but they have an architecture degree. So for us, it took sort of 10 years longer, And then we had to kind of accelerate.
Well, you did quite well. How did you end up in Australia? Was it because of work, or was it usually also people go because of a person they met? I don't know. What was the case for you?
Yeah, so the story is apparently there's only three reasons to move to another country, and it's work, love, and adventure. And it was sort of the three of them.
So you covered all of three of them. You call the office LAVA, which stands for Laboratory for Visionary Architecture. How did you guys come up with your name and the vision, as you said, and what are your design philosophy, if you have one? What was your core reason to call it this way and to go into this direction?
So this first project, obviously we didn't have a name yet, and we didn't even have a proper company. But the developer, or sort of visionaire behind the project, he always talked about us as the visionary architects. So he kind of introduced us to everybody as the visionary architects. And when it then came to actually formulating that as a name and as a brand, we came up with this idea of the laboratory for visionary architecture. And I mean, one thing is to have an acronym like LAVA, like OMA, like, all the architecture firms in the world always have these acronyms that either stand for their founders, like SOM, Skidmore, Owens, Merrill, or KPF, Cohen, Peterson, Fox, or they stand for something like Office for Metropolitan Architecture. And we sort of thought it's a little bit tongue-in-cheek, LAVA. It sounds good as a name. It's easy to spell and to write, and stands for Laboratory for Visionary Architecture. And on a maybe more kind of serious note, we thought, why is it a laboratory? Most architecture firms, sooner or later, develop sort of a formula how to do architecture. And I mean, 99% of all architecture around the world is kind of what I call design by Excel spreadsheet. So you get some sort of brief with the numbers, with the plot ratio, the cost, the floor area, the height limits, and so on, or how many apartments. And then you turn that into architecture. And architecture in the sort of widest sense. You turn it into real estate. And we sort of wanted to say that architecture should really be about architecture. It should be about culture, should be about science, should be about well-being, should be about people. And the laboratory is kind of the environment where you research these topics and try to find solutions for the challenges of our times, for sustainability, for social changes, for cultural desires, and new materials, new construction methods, new typologies, new ways to do architecture, procure architecture, and execute architecture.
I see. And how do you, when you said the traditional offices approach architecture through this Excel spreadsheet method, and this is why I mentioned it also, for example, maybe sometimes in Germany, this approach is extreme because also I guess the developers and the clients are a little bit not so visionary because of construction costs in the country and so on and so forth. What is your different approach to be this laboratory for visionary architecture? When you get the brief of a design, how do you guys at your office approach a project so that you can actually achieve this perfect, not perfect, but this different way and different result that is based on other data or factors than just exclusively the floor area? And
yeah, no, it's interesting because at university, you're sort of taught that architecture is like this pure art form. You have a poem by Franz Kafka, and your task is to interpret that as a house on the cliff, inspired by Franz Kafka. And that's super interesting. But nobody at uni tells you about how much does a house cost. Nobody tells you about gravity. Nobody tells you how to keep the rain out. and nobody tells you about how to convince a client to actually build a crazy Kafka house on the cliff. And so when you come then into the real world, it's sort of a bit of a shock, I think, for most people. And then there's these firms who build actually 99% of everything that you see. And the company that I was working for in Australia was one of these firms, a firm that nobody has ever heard of, that have built like 2/3 of the Sydney CBD over the last 120 years. And that was really interesting to see, like I walked in and there was kind of a marble reception, black carpet, mirrors, it was sort of this fancy place where I thought, what is this? This looks like a law firm or an insurance or something. And that was my introduction to commercial architecture practice. And it was really interesting to see how they work, how they count the hours. Every person, every hour that is spent ends up on an Excel spreadsheet and gets somehow billed through the system. You have HR, you have accountants, you have a print manager, you have an IT manager, you have a marketing department, graphic design department, business development, and so on. And this was like the furthest from my education that I could imagine. But it was really interesting to see. And then I came from this more, creative, investigative, experimental approach with like Frei Otto and lightweight structures at the university in Stuttgart, and this, learning from nature and translating that into amazing, fantastical structures. And then I could apply my creativity and combine that with this kind of commercial powerhouse. And that became really successful. So we won the competition for the Beijing Olympics and for some other projects, because what they needed was the creativity. And what I didn't know about was the commercial reality and how to deliver like, a tender documentation and those sort of things. And I think at Lava, because we have this background in bigger, sort of more commercial firms, like UN Studio is not a commercial firm, but obviously it's a well-oiled machine. So you have this experience about how to design, how to construct, how to run an office, how to deal with staff, and teams, and clients, and so on. But you also have the creative drive to make a difference and ultimately every architect, like the minimum that you want to do as an architect is change the world, right? Anything below that is not enough. So you need to change the world in whatever small or big steps you can. And then there's the topics about sustainability, about building materials, about new forms of construction, for me, for example, was always about this lightweight construction, about learning from nature, about building more with less, and coming up with new typologies that then kind of change the life or the behavior or the experiences of the end user. So we did a lot of sort of educational projects, for example, in Sydney, that are called things like the Martian Embassy or the Dream Lab, where we transformed spaces for children into these kind of fantasy spaces. So the children, they don't go to school, they go into the Dream Lab. And going to the Dream Lab, of course, it already looks a way that you feel like you're allowed to be creative and you're allowed to do things differently and to speak up and to, write songs and poems and paint and so on. And those sort of projects for me are my favorite projects, where you can really see that the architecture directly affects the end users of the project. And with children, the beautiful thing is that they're sort of still kind of new to the party and not naive, but, like innocent. And they come in, and it's sort of the first architectural transformative experience they have. And I had those sort of experiences, and I think it shapes you for your life. And I'm curious. That would be my hope.
I'm curious, have you always had always these very developed imaginations? And what were the most inspiring moments through your architecture education? Because you mentioned you studied in Stuttgart, in Switzerland. Also, I don't know, I've been in two different university also in Stuttgart I visited, and they're very oriented also in exactly this, as you said, like studying nature. Now they're famous for their parametric architecture. I always think maybe also the car industry that's in the city somehow maybe influences the way of doing architecture over there. So was it always a combination of your personal talent plus what kind of skills you learned that, in your opinion, set you apart also to win a competition as the aquatic center in Beijing? Because that's like a outstanding project that was shown all around the world. Back in the days, I was maybe not yet really an architecture student, but I remember that building was all over the place and everybody knew like the aquatic center out of bubbles, so to say.
Yeah.
And me also as a youngster back then, I was like, oh, that looks really cool and really different.
Yeah, I mean, that's sort of like three questions in one. So Stuttgart is a very special place, I think. And it always had this engineering and architecture tradition, which you just grow up with. You know, in Stuttgart, you had Frei Otto. Now you have Werner Sobeck. You had Jörg Schleich and Leonhard Andre and partner, lots of famous engineering companies that always collaborated with architects. And then you had a series of building exhibitions, which is something that I've never seen in Australia or actually anywhere, but in Germany we had, for example, the 1927, this obviously 100 years ago, the Werkbundschau, which was a building exhibition where Corbusier, Hans Scharoun, Walter Gropius built the Waisenhof-Siedlung. And that was unbelievable, you know, like to build a precinct with the absolute top, like at the time, avant-garde architects, new materials, new typologies, new systems. And, you know, to really promote that and let that happen. And that was a tradition. So this was 1927. Then in 1970 something was a garden exhibition, and so a landscape exhibition. And they transformed part of Stuttgart, including the Schlossgarten, like the kind of the public park areas, into interesting landscape gardens, including amazing water courses and fountains and pavilions and amphitheaters. And they had a lot of kind of lightweight kind of suspension bridges and pedestrian bridges or cable net towers, and those sort of things that are like still now are super avant-garde and super special structures. And we just kind of grew up with them. So you just walk around them and this your natural environment. And I remember one day as a little child, I went to the Institute for Lightweight Structures, which was built inside a prototype of the Montreal German Pavilion by Frei Otto and Rolf Gutbrod. So there's all of a sudden this building that doesn't look like a building at all. It's sort of a cable net structure with a mast in the center and then cables spanning and timber shingles. And inside it's sort of a free-form, multiple platforms that are kind of hanging off the mast. And it looks more like a pirate ship than an actual building. And that is sort of my first architectural experience that I can remember. And that is definitely something that shapes you, you know, like architecture doesn't have to be a square box with square windows. Architecture can be free form, can be playful, can be non-linear, can be structures that look more like a leaf or a spider web or something rather than a man-made structure. And so I think growing up in that environment kind of naturally instills that into you. And then I was very curious about other forms of architecture. So I sort of, at some stage, we did an excursion to Ticino, which is the Italian part of Switzerland. And you had an amazing school of architecture there with Mario Botta and Luigi Snozzi and Aurelio Galfetti. And their architecture was all about this sort of modernism embedded in pristine nature. So it was about this relationship between nature as this force around us and then man-made interventions. Like famously, for example, Aurelio Galfetti transformed the castle in Bellinzona. And the castle is on top of the hill. And there's a path to go up, which is very long. And so the challenge was how to get up onto this castle. And so he cut this slot into the rock that takes you kind of through a cave, and then with a lift you arrive in the center of the castle. And it's sort of a James Bond type, welcoming experience. And that is still like one of the most sort of quoted references from us, I think, when you work with topography and mountains and existing structures, like this sort of thing, like how do you approach this? What's your first experience and how do you get into this thing? So that was one experience. And then after this excursion, I was a little bit obsessed with this Ticino architecture. And so I moved to Lausanne and studied with Luigi Snozzi for a year. And then I moved to Lugano, and Peter Zumthor was teaching there, and Mario Botta and Galfetti and lots of inspiring people. And I just sort of learned from all these different people. I mean, Peter Zumthor is amazing as well. He has this sort of more poetic approach, and he talks a lot about intuition. So he's not sort of about science and understanding everything. He would say to the students, they are up all night drawing their drawings, and last minute, oh my God, Peter Zumthor is going to come tomorrow. And they finish all their projects, and then Zumthor walks in and says, okay, close your eyes. I don't want to see anything. Tell me about your project. I've just drawn this all night. But that was amazing. So you close your eyes, and the student kind of goes like, so I want to create like this really big, dark space. And Zumthor, smoking cigar, kind of looks into the smoke and goes like, how big? And it's like so profound. But then it's like, how big is big and how dark is dark, and what does it smell like? And those sort of like, I think it's amazing. And it's still something that I think about when I do architecture, about like, what do you actually want to achieve? Like, what do you want to feel when you walk into this place? Or what do you like, how does it feel when you touch it?
Crazy. No, great story.
and then after Switzerland, I went back to Stuttgart University, and I sort of felt like this was in 98, I think, and architecture had obviously changed as well throughout the 90s, that my first degree was all hand-drawn, like lines on tracing paper. And if you made a mistake, you had to take a razor blade and scratch it all out and start again. There was like, the traditional architecture with a ruler and a scale bar and all that sort of stuff. But then by 98, so this was my final year in Stuttgart, there was a course that was called the Digital Year. And maybe that was the beginning of parametric architecture. That is now Achim Hensel and those sort of people. And within this Digital Year, we were introduced to internet, internet, what's internet? What's email? Why would you write an email? And web design, what does that mean? Like what is a space within the internet? How does it represent itself? And how is it different from real architecture? What's virtual architecture versus real architecture? And that topic is still around, right, with metaverse and everything. But so within that year, I learned all sort of computer programs, web design, HTML. At the time, there was a program called Flash, which could do animations, 3D Max, and virtual reality. And then I presented my final thesis in a VR cube. And VR cube, this is like, how long is this? 25 years ago, right? The VR cube was a virtual reality environment, like a cube, I don't know if it's like 3 by 3 by 3 meters or something, where stereo images are projected on all surfaces, wall, ceiling, floor. And you wear 3D goggles and 3D gloves. And all of a sudden you can virtually, or you can physically walk through a virtual environment. And that was at the time completely groundbreaking, that you can design something on the computer, but then you can walk into it and interact with it. So you can scale it, you can animate things, you can communicate with people. And at that time, actually, Alexander Rieck was working at the Fraunhofer Institute, who also had a VR cave. So we connected, I think, the only 2 VR caves in entire Europe, or at least in Germany, were both in Stuttgart, sort of next to each other. We connected those 2 VR caves with an optic fiber cable and made there one of the first kind of VR real-time interactive architecture experience. So this was a breakthrough at the time for this virtual reality environment and thinking. And before, Zoom and Skype and Metaverse and everything that we're doing now kind of interactively on a daily basis. And so my thesis was about imagining the sort of the office of the future and how virtual reality can extend physical reality in the future. And this is 25 years ago, and we thought, of course, that by 2020 everybody would only wear goggles and gloves and walk through virtual environments. And I was sort of surprised in a way how little of that became reality. But on the other hand, everything became reality. It just looks different. I mean, a few years ago, the Oculus Go and Oculus Rift and so on became popular. And all of a sudden, we started again virtual environments and walking through virtual spaces. Then the Google Glasses came out. They somehow didn't work. And now the next generation comes out. But in terms of this, like what we're doing now, right? You're in Germany, I'm in Sydney, and we're talking like if it was normal, When you think about like our parents at the time, they would go like, oh, an overseas call, stop everything. Someone is calling from overseas. And that happened like every 2 years or something. The auntie from America or something.
I grew up, I was born in Bulgaria and I moved to Italy 2000. I was 8 years old, and I remember that that was the beginning of like mass internet, that you would start buying your computer and have internet at home. And again, while you're in the internet, you cannot use the phone because it's doing those weird noises. Yeah. But we were used to buy these cards where you can go to the public phone and call back to Bulgaria because it was cheaper. And then at some point Skype came in, and I remember that at the beginning Skype was whether free, like to call phones, or it was like €1 a month and you could call unlimited phones that are fixed phones all over the globe. And it was crazy. Like we were calling my grandma and she was so worried that we're talking so long because we came from like 5-minute call to now we can stay on the phone as long as we want. And that's some stuff that for now are taken for granted, but they were big technological steps towards.
It's unbelievable. And I mean, the one thing that we didn't anticipate that much is the rise of the smartphone.
Yeah.
I think like Jules Verne and people like that had predicted things like that. But, the reality of now taking a train in Germany or Sydney or anywhere and having not 90%, 100% of all people glued to their phone, that is really unbelievable. And the fact that, you wake up in the morning, you don't look out the window what the weather's like. You check on your phone what the weather's like. Stuff like that
That's true.
is unbelievable. And you check
But
the news and you check the emails. I mean, when I moved to Sydney and then internet was sort of well established and I had a laptop, but it took like 5 minutes for the laptop to actually fire up. And then to get into your email and download all the emails, like half an hour was gone, just the process of that. And now it's just everything is available all day long, which is a blessing and a curse, I have to say. I don't think that like quality of life has only improved through iPhones. I think there's a lot of issues with sort of online addiction and sort of isolation and things.
yeah, that is true. And one thing that you told me before that hit me kind of was like when you were starting your office, you among the things you were deciding together with your partners is how you want to treat your employees, how you know not only the part about architecture, but also about like really philosophy of the company within working with each other. If somebody wants to join Lava, what are the things that you guys look most for in a person? Like what kind of qualities, and also in the end of the day, what are the, in your opinion, what is the environment at Lava? Because also one very big problem with architecture is that it's not a profession where it's, I don't know, it's not like being a lawyer where you have to read a law, understand the law, and then you're done, like it's there. It's like you start from this blank canvas and you have to design something, and the more visionary it gets, probably it's going to be harder, and it involves a lot of hours, and like there is a lot of problems with, I don't know, offices that have their people working crazy hours and things like that. So have you tried also to do something about this once people join the office, that they don't go crazy?
Yeah, that's the ongoing mission, that we all don't go crazy. But yeah, it's part of architecture culture, and in a way, it shouldn't be, right? I mean, there shouldn't be like suffering, and there shouldn't be like late nights or sleepless nights. And why is that? I mean, quite often it's not actually like, and I'm not only talking about us, but it's not only the kind of the employer telling people you have to work all night, but it's sort of the passion within the teams and within the projects that drive people to put in these crazy hours. And that comes from university. You know, at university, like I had all-nighters, and then the next morning Zumta comes in. That's sort of normal, right? If you haven't done that, then you haven't worked hard enough. And in a funny way, it's also sometimes at 4 o'clock in the morning when you can hardly keep your eyes open, then all of a sudden you're like, I have to simplify the whole thing, and you start again. And that's when the best ideas come out. You know, it's a little bit this artist thing as well, where, you know, you're motivated by the art, and, you know, there's always unlimited options. Like when you talk about the law should be black and white, right? It's probably not always black and white, but there's, or mathematicians or something, there's like an answer, and that's the correct answer. In architecture, you can have on any building, you can have a curved roof, a straight roof, a tilted roof, a metal roof, a timber roof, tile roof, for argument's sake, right? There's not one answer. There's a million styles, there's a million responses to everything. And even when you're finished, there's still a better answer somewhere, and you're always chasing that. But of course, as an employer, you have to be very careful that you don't kind of burn out your employees and yourself. So we're trying to balance that, and it doesn't always work. You know, it's an ongoing, I think, it's an ongoing cultural thing in every office, that you have to create a culture. Firstly, that people like coming to work, that it's a pleasant environment, that there's no aggression, there's no sort of obligation. Like the only obligation is that you have a passion for the project, and that you're on the same team. Like you're trying to make this happen, right? I don't tell people when to come or when to go, but I certainly tell them when they don't come up with the goods that we need to deliver. right? Or when I'm like, hey, come on, like, I think we can do better than that. So I hope that that in all offices we can create this environment where it's fun to work and where people can contribute. And that's something, for example, that we're very interested in, that anybody can have a good idea. And it's literally like the intern straight off the street or off the university, he can come in and have a winning idea. Like we did back in our times when we were young architects in the offices. We had good ideas and they gave us opportunities. And I think that's an obligation that we give these opportunities to other people. So it's about the best idea and about what works best for the project. So quite often I start projects with like, okay, guys, little charrette before lunch. Everybody does 3 options for this. And then we sort of, okay, let's look at 30 options. What can you do on this project at this point of time? Let's say you have a childcare center and you're like, hey, guys, let's brainstorm this. And then, of course, not all 30 options can be built or considered, but at least they can be put on the table and gives everybody the opportunity to think about it. I think one sort of flip side is where today you say childcare center, and then people come with 3,000 Pinterest images of childcare centers. And then I go, well, that's not what I asked you. I asked you, give me 3 options for your childcare center and not for, 3,000 references from Google. Which is also like the downside of the internet age, right? When you say, hey, think about whatever it is, right? A roof shape, then people actually need to think about the roof shape and not just Google roof shape or, hey, Chat GPT, give me a roof shape. Like all these tools are interesting, or parametric modeling. It's like, hey, here's 5,000 options in Grasshopper. It's like, yeah, great, but what do we actually want to achieve? So we're trying to bridge the gap, I think, between, all the technical advancements, but also the human, intuition. And maybe that's a Zumthor thing, right? Then I say, close your eyes, tell me about your childcare center.
But one thing that it's now that I'm thinking is that, okay, like you have your background that you have told me about, also about your teachers, but your partners that are based in the other locations of Lava. I don't know, if I would join Lava Berlin, I would be working more closely with the team there. Did you create a way of thinking and a way of working that it's very homogenic, like across all locations?
I think we have things that we have in common, but we also have differences. And on the important projects, we try to really brainstorm them together because we have different views on things and different approaches. For example, Alexander has a sort of more scientific background. So he would always put everything into context of scientific breakthrough or human achievement, or he would tell stories about how the moon landing was only possible because of this and that, and therefore this project is only possible if we use that technology or something. And Tobias is very sort of analytical and he has this ability to really understand what's going on and somehow synthesize this and then turn this into kind of a logic sequence of outcomes. And he thrives, for example, in sort of problem solving in relation to construction and materials and geometries. When some engineer says, we can't build a curved roof, then he's like, have you looked at this in your opera house? And this is how you can build a curved roof in 5 different ways. Please go home and show me your solutions. and I don't know, this is simplification, right? And I think that I'm always interested in what is the thing that we're creating at the end of the day. Even if we tick all the boxes and all the square meters are right and everything is waterproof and everything works and so on, then I'm sort of like asking the question, so what is it we're creating, and should it be more this, or should it be more this, or should it be more this, or how does it? I don't know. Maybe this a little bit more intuitive thing. But obviously, like together we are the strongest, and you can tell by the projects if all the partners have been involved, because then it makes the projects richer.
Yeah, you have also like last or couple, I don't know, because the pandemic here, they kind of like blend in together now, but you have won the German pavilion for the Dubai Expo, and for also from the way you talk, like that was the German pavilion was a very viral project, let's call it this way, in the day and age where we, as you said, we got most of our information on a smartphone, and every architect every day go on the, I don't know, Design Boom, Arc Daily, this project was over the place. And maybe this was also the impulse because you guys recently also released a book with the projects. I think it's recently. Yeah, exactly that one. So now people maybe can get more from. Maybe I should add it. I should add it to the little library that I have here with architecture books.
Yeah, 100%. We'll get one to you from Berlin.
And I was wondering. Are you guys very, from the way you talk, it's very passionate. Are you also very competitive? Because it feels like it's more like, you're the first architect I talk to, which talks about architecture a little bit like, it feels to me like sports, Like, come on, we have to do a better project. Like, we have to play a better game, so to say. So is competitiveness, because also we participate in a lot of competitions as architect, part of your character and spirit at Lava, or it's more just like passion competing against yourself?
Yeah, good question. I mean, who are you competing against? You're competing against other architects. You're competing against yourself. The architecture industry is funny how you always think you're doing all these things for your peers, right? Like architects are not interested in impressing their clients. They're interested in impressing their other architects. So you have a dinner party, only architects. You go to an opening, all architects. You go to the movies, architecture movie. And that's pretty stupid, right? So in all other industries, you would say, hey, you need to play golf. So you meet more clients for your law business. Or you have to go sailing to meet more clients for your law business. And then architect is like, let's hang out with other architects. Like I invite other architects for a barbecue at my place. We go to the pub, all of that. Like it's a little bit sort of incestuous in that way amongst architects. But it's also, it is a bit competitive, I mean, but in a positive way. Like obviously you're sort of trying to contribute something to society, and there's always this debate around what that actually is. And, like the awards is a good example. For example, the sort of architecture awards. We did this pro bono creative writing center that I spoke about earlier, the Martian Embassy for indigenous children in a marginalized kind of part of town. And that won all the awards. It won the highest award in Australia, the Premier's Award of the Institute of Architecture. And I was super happy about winning that. But there was also a feeling, did we actually win it for the project, or did we win it for what it is, for the brief? Because it's for children, it's creative, it's, community, it's grassroots and so on. So that always plays a role. If you design a Prada shop that is 100 times better than our childcare center, then the Prada shop wouldn't win the gold medal, right? And so at the moment, it feels a little bit like that in architecture. I think all around the world, with Alejandro Aravena winning the Pritzker Prize. That was sort of maybe the first time where that came to my attention, where he's doing an unbelievable job, right? But he's not designing villas for rich people in Miami. He's designing, for poor communities, low-cost housing, sustainable materials, and changing kind of communities bottom up. And in Sydney, we have a lot of projects now. even when they're commercial projects, it's like a little bit of recycled timber and a little bit of this and a little bit of we need to. I mean, this I don't want to simplify this, but all kind of inclusive design. If it's gender or race, culture, history, geography. So everything has to be inclusive, and it should be, and everything has to be sustainable, and it should be, and everything has to be recycled, and it should be. But it's also not the only topic in architecture. So it's interesting how architecture moves in these different circles. And when, for example, the digital architecture came up, that was a big hype. And then all of a sudden there's a backlash against like Patrick Schumacher and Zaha and parametricism, because it's all like machine architecture and it doesn't serve any purpose and so on, or whatever the criticism is, right? And then it goes back to this kind of grassroots, recycled brick, bamboo and mud construction and so on. And then there will be another cycle, which is more, again, about advanced manufacturing and robotics, or creating new typologies for the society that we live in.
Yeah, also like there's the space architecture that's coming, because I don't know, we're planning, at least as humanity, to go back in outer space. That it's a topic. Is there a particular project or all? I don't know if they all of them equally are special for you, or maybe a project that you were at the end surprised in positive or from the result you guys achieved. Do you have something favorite among all the things that you have now published also in a book?
There's one project that for us was kind of a little bit of a breakthrough project, I guess, which is this master city in Abu Dhabi, which was kind of labeled as the city of the future, and kind of a live-in urban laboratory for sustainable living. And this was in 2007, 2008. We won a competition within the Norman Foster master plan for the city, for the center of the city. And in the master plan, the center of the city was kind of a 5-star hotel with a conference center. And it was kind of like, in the master plan, was just like a round kind of egg-shaped building. And this was a competition. And we sort of sat down and said, like, the center of the city can't be an egg. It has to be a public space. It has to be accessible. It has to create community. It has to be full of people. It has to create events. It has to create markets, festivals. It has to allow all these things to happen. And so we essentially, rather than building a building in the center of the city, we created an open space, Master Plaza. And the open space was surrounded by all the space programs. So we still had the brief, right, with the hotel and the exhibition center and the conference and the cinemas and shopping and so on. But we kind of manipulated the brief in a way that we created an open space surrounded by buildings. And the open space, being in Abu Dhabi with a kind of desert climate, which can be hot in summer and cold at night, we created these umbrellas, kind of like a sea of umbrellas that open and close. So during the day, they provide shade and produce energy, and at night they fold up and produce light and atmosphere and release the hot air to the sky. And that was a breakthrough project because it was thinking on an urban scale. It wasn't actually about the building. It was about how the buildings are arranged and what they do and what they allow to happen in terms of the activation and the programming and so on. And that set us onto a different path, I think, where I think the tagline, what we wrote on the competition panels was from an object to a place. So we're not designing objects, we're creating places. And so since then, on every project, we're thinking about, yes, you can do an object and it can be square or round or a triangle, pyramid, or it can be glass or brick or concrete. But how can we actually create a place? And by doing so, all of a sudden you expand your field of activity into urbanism and master planning. And I quite like that idea that you're not creating like little things that are sort of, every piece of architecture is debatable, right? Do you like the Chipperfield? Do you like Zaha Hadid? Do you like this? Do you like this? But the question is always, what do these buildings do for the city or for the place that they're in? And a good building gives something back to community and society, and creating more than just what it's designed for, but it creates an opportunity, for example, for a marketplace, for a festival site, and so on. Sorry, I just have to get a glass of water here.
Okay, no problem.
Too much talking.
That's the beauty of having the possibility to edit later on the podcast.
Yeah, it's great.
And
so the point is that since then we have started doing more master planning and working more on urban scale and public realm. And I always think that's very exciting. It's exciting to build houses. It's exciting to build, any type of building, but to actually create spaces that are used by people and become kind of public domain or public use. That's very exciting, I think.
Indeed. I think also that it's for me personally, I lately read this book that's called How to Win Work. It's about from a partner at MVRDV, and I thought about challenging this book by trying to start my own office. And I thought, okay, what would be more important for me? Why would I say I'm a different architect, or what is my, as you said, why I'm so much caring about this thing? And for me, I think that architecture is based on limited resources, right? Like we have limited terrain on the planet or space, no matter even if you build on water, it's limited. And we have limited resources that we apply. And I think it's such a pity when you use all this money and these resources to build something that it's not exciting. Like I think it's just a great waste. And I think, like as you say, every project should be an opportunity, and you have to really do the best out of what you can and all the possibilities and put all the efforts. And I was wondering if you have some suggestions for people that wants to start an office in 2021. If there is, because you clearly also know how to sell your ideas to your clients. It's not only about let's make a visionary architecture. It's also you have some, as an office, as an organization, you have the ability to convince people that your ideas are worth pursuing. Do you have any suggestions how you do that, or it's just about doing great architecture?
That's a good question. I'm interested in this book, How to Win Work. It sounds amazing. I think, point of difference is an important thing to think about for anything, right? Like any brand, like what is the value proposition? And this is sort of like business speak, right? But what's the value proposition? Why would someone go with you over someone else? And there's always the question, some people would say because we are cheaper or we are faster or we're more efficient, right? But then there's always someone cheaper, faster, more efficient.
Exactly.
And then you can say, but my architecture is more beautiful. But that is something, it's in the eye of the beholder. So someone may say it's beautiful, someone may say it's not beautiful. So you need to kind of think about how you can position yourself that it's unique. Like don't do the same thing that everybody does, but better or cheaper or faster. Do it differently. I think that would be the advice. And as vague as that is, right? But what is your niche? What is your passion? I think that's most important, because you can only be good at something that you're passionate about, and you can only really convincingly communicate that to a client if you're passionate about it. If you're sort of forced into these things, it's like, this is really the most amazing whatever, but you don't believe in it, like they pick up on it. So for a young architect, I would say like what you really feel strongly about, and turn that into your thing, into your brand, and into your identity.
And how did you deal with also with the risk and stress? Because also being an entrepreneur, an architect, it's also stressful, right? Because I mean, as it might sound like, I don't know, being employed is just it's less stressful. Maybe not less risky, but less stressful. And also, you seem to be a very adventurous person through the story you told me about your life, because you've been in multiple cities, multiple universities. Always sounded like you were pursuing more like the adventure and the learning rather than, I don't know, any kind of stability or any kind of like looking for finding a career or something like that. So are you a natural adventurer, or how do you deal with stress and risk when that appears to happen in your life?
Well, I mean, there's obviously stressful moments, and there's moments where you lose the plot, and there's good times and bad times. But I've been thinking about this, what stress actually means and why people are stressed. And I came to the conclusion that stress is a result of a situation that you can't control. So when I ride a motorbike at 180 miles through, through the countryside or through the city, then that's maybe dangerous and it's stressful, but I'm sort of in control of it. But if you sit on the back of the motorbike, then you really freak out because you have no control over it. And it's the same exposure to danger or to environment, but you're like, you can't control it. And I think that that the stress is often caused, like for an employee, for example, when they're super stressed, is they're trying to match someone else's expectations, which they can't control. They think this is really important that these two lines meet if you zoom in 1,000% into your Rhino file, where I look at it and I'm like, hey, can you just zoom out? And it doesn't matter if they meet or not. Like I can make the decision, but they can't, and they get stressed and I don't. And this is maybe a really like tiny example, but you know, that happens on the big picture where you get super stressed about some client requests, about some deliverables, about some deadlines and so on. And you're stressed if you're not in charge, if you can't control it, like you're getting hammered by requests and you can't see the end of it. But the more experience you have, and that comes obviously with age and over time, then you can also say like, okay, so the client is freaking out. Let's all go to the pub and see what we can do about it tomorrow. You know, because that may be a better solution than all pulling your hair out about something that by tomorrow has changed anyway. And quite often with clients, it's important to understand where the client actually comes from in terms of like, what do they actually want? And quite often in projects, in bigger projects, the client is not one person. But even if it is one person, then, the client has to think about the cost of his building, about the timeline of his building, about the functionality of his building, and many different aspects. And usually there are different departments within the client, right? So one, like you show someone an amazing image and it has a few trees in front of the building. And then they say like, the cost consultant says like, oh, how much do these trees cost? They're not in my budget. And then someone else comes and says, oh, this tree species, are you sure that grows in my country? Because it doesn't look like that. And the third one says, oh, I love these trees, but can you make them red instead of green? And so on, like everybody comes from a different perspective, but you're the only one who can actually say, like, you put these trees there for a reason because you think it's the right thing to do. And you can also judge, is this going to be a big cost or is this impossible? And I'm just using a tree as an example. The same goes for any sort of component. And it's good to understand, it's like, okay, so this guy, he has the Excel spreadsheet. We need to give him assurance that everything he sees is accounted for and, doesn't blow his budget and so on. The other person needs to know that it's buildable and it's feasible and that it works and the materials are available and so on. And the third person needs to be sure that you create this amazing atmosphere and this amazing place and that this is what they wanted you to do. So you have these different people and you learn over time to deal with these different aspects and the different people. And Tobias actually taught me something, and I hope that I remember this correctly, but quite often in a building process, you deal like with project managers, with clients, which are client representatives, and they have their own agenda, their own kind of focus, and quite often by the time the building is finished, that person isn't there anymore. So you may have, made a major compromise in your design for a person who doesn't even see the end of the project for a number of reasons. And so I think there was a story with the Mercedes Museum, and you can't quote me on that exactly, but I think the original client, like the director of Mercedes, wasn't there anymore by the time the museum was finished, but the museum is still there. And it's a gift, to Mercedes and to the city and to the people. And at the end of the day, nobody asks anymore, was it 10% more expensive or whatever, all these things. At the end of the day, it's about the piece and the place and the people. And I think that's a good thing to remember as well.
Yeah, that's definitely a great anecdote. And you mentioned before how you met with Tobias and Alexander. And the other question I had is, because of the complexity of the multiple aspects that involved an architecture office, do you need to have partners? And how did you know them for a longer time? Because you said you met at the Venice Biennale before. Also, you have to have enormous trust with each other, right? Because you guys go into this thing together and you have to really trust each other. So do you need to have partners, and what kind of trust, or how you build trust with them?
Yeah, it's a very good question. Do you need partners? I think it's very helpful to have partners because it can get very lonely. You're at the top of your company and everybody who works in your office is essentially your employees. So they can also be your friends and everything, but at the end of the day, you're the boss and you're paying them for what they do, right? And so quite often, like the best people that you really love, and they've been there for 5 years, and they're like, oh, by the way, I'm moving to Antarctica or something, because they follow their own dreams, of course, or they open their own offices, or they do whatever they want. And you can understand that. But at the end of the day, you're on your own, sort of. And with a partner, of course, you can bounce things off each other, and you can discuss strategy, and you know that someone has a genuine interest in the success of what you're doing together. So I think it's very beneficial. The question, of course, is how do you choose your partner? And more often than not, probably, I can't put a percentage to it, but the architecture firms that have existed a long time, and the architecture firms that have gone separate ways at some stage. So I have a lot of respect for the people who managed to somehow keep it together. I think MV is an example of people who kept it together. And other people like Bjarke and Julian with Plot, they were partners and they split up, and then they became individually super successful. That's also good. You don't have to split in bad ways or bad terms. There's a lot of architecture couples who, like any marriage, can go different ways, and then some stay together and some don't. I don't know. I think it depends on your personality as well. If you're like a lonely wolf kind of person, or if you're more a social animal. But I think it's very good to have people on the journey. And if it's not your business partners, you can still surround yourself with other people you trust. And it's actually good, what I found more recently. How I said that architects surround themselves with other architects. And I started sort of just, not for business purposes, but it's just it's a relief to sometimes talk to someone who's not an architect and who has, maybe he's or she's older than you and has a completely different line of work, but still the same sort of topics about how a business works and how to get clients and how do you pay your tax or not and this and that. How do you invest into the future of the business, or how do you market yourself, or just like hanging out. So it's I think it's good to diversify your kind of mentors. And mentor, maybe that is again, another level of this topic where, find people that can teach you something, and they don't have to be architects. They don't have to be older either, but it's sort of more experienced people, and they can coach you about a lot of things. And quite often that kind of gets you to another level where you're like, oh, really? That's how it works, kind of.
Sometimes you find mentors in books. So I was curious, if people get your book, what they're gonna find inside it. Like, what kind of things they will learn from the book, from Lava, and is it more about the projects, I think, or?
The book is not your typical architecture book. So it's not a picture book, and we have done quite a few books before, which are probably behind me somewhere, which are more kind of like, this is this project, this is this project, and this is this project. And this book is called What If? And it kind of speculates on different topics that are not necessarily architectural topics, but topics of society. Topics like future cities, planning with nature, digitizing the process, energy transition, creativity at work, mindful hardware for mindful connections. There's sort of different topics that all, of course, touch on architecture and urbanism and automation and manufacturing and so on, but they're not just like, here's a building, look at this beautiful photo. And for the book, we didn't actually write most of the book. We invited other people to contribute to the book and to write essays about different topics, and that relate obviously to the work that we're interested in. And then we use our architecture kind of more as examples for some of the topics that I talked about. So I think it's a good book that is not just like, hey, let's look at this book and then copy the top 5 projects or use them for our own project. It's more like stimulation for thought processes and kind of get you thinking in different directions. And so each of the partners has written an essay, and then lots of ex-staff and just sort of collaborators, journalists, critical thinkers. And it was just for us an opportunity to when you do a book or a website or anything for your company, then you have to think about, what do we actually do? How do we want to communicate that? And who do we actually want to read this book? So is this for students? Is this for clients? Is this for our parents? Is this for ourselves? We want to make ourselves proud and lots of photos of us with awards and things. Or do we want this for the greater public to be like an inspiration to think about society? Or is it all of that?
So the people who gonna read gonna find out who is it for.
Yeah, and I hope yeah, you'll find out if you can relate to it. I think it's a very interesting book and very stimulating book. And maybe the next book is just photos of details of our buildings, and then it's all about materials and how things join and things. That's a different type of book. Or maybe it's no architecture at all.
That sounds good. That sounds good. Chris, you have been very inspiring to me in the conversation. I always have one last question to each guest. As creatives, we have this muse that sometimes it's there and sometimes it goes. And then you have to do something to find the muse again. So whether reading books or going on adventures or traveling or watching a movie, is there something that you go back to or something that's your favorite activity where you get your creative and inspiration energies refueled?
Yeah, I mean, for me, that would be two things. One is activity in nature, and one is music. So if I have the choice between a theoretical lecture about history of parametric architecture in the Middle Ages and going snorkeling on Bondi Beach, then I will always prefer the latter. And music, I recently joined again the Conservatorium of Music in Sydney, where I do a sort of a jazz ensemble class. And it's just nice, sometimes like I actually change meetings and go like, hey guys, sorry, I know the project is important, but I have to go to my jazz class. And it's just something like all of a sudden I'm just a guy in the room with the guitar and by far not the best in the room. And I can learn from other people, and there's a completely different sets of rules. They throw you like the real book of jazz. Say here, page 350. Let's take the A train in B flat, and you're like, wait a minute, where's B flat? And it just kind of stimulates you to think about things completely differently. And nobody thinks of me there as an architect or anything. Everybody is just who they are with their instruments, and we try to play the A train.
Sounds great. Well, I'll take that into account. Maybe I'll try to do something, although I'm very, very bad with music. So thank you very much for the conversation. And I always say this was your first time on the Creative Insider podcast, but as soon there is something new or somebody else from Lava wants to tell their version of the story, they're always welcome to participate too.
That'd be great. Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.